So I would like to introduce our first formal speaker, actually, of this meeting. And it's my pleasure to have Louise Watson here. And she studies techno-anthropology at the University of Aalborg here in Denmark. And she has done a really interesting study that we learned about when we were at ICAS in Umeå, and this is why Louise is here. So Louise, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for hosting and thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to present you a project called Circle of Voices, which is a digital ethnographic research project led with young Indigenous women in Quebec. And the way I want to start is by saying that I wanted to do something that matters, and I did not want to write just another paper that would end in the drawer of academia and be used by the elitist, knowledgeable people. So I wondered, and I came upon this term of engaged anthropology, and I was really willing to link activism and research. And there is this definition by an American anthropologist, Charles Hale, activist anthropology, which is a method through which we affirm a political alignment with a group in struggle, engage in a dialogue to shape and transform together these conditions of inequality, oppression, and violence. And it starts with identifying your ethical and your political convictions. And so I just asked myself a few questions, being in Canada for the first time. What is my place as a white, female, non-Canadian researcher? How can I positively serve the community and the women? How can I walk beside and not in front of? And also, what are the existing guidelines and codes of conduct that are used already by the scientific community? So in that case, the First Nations OCAP principle, ownership, control, access and possession of the data. And then there are very specific guidelines published by Quebec Native women, Femmes Autochtones du Québec, about researching with Aboriginal women, basically. And then, being there, I realized what was important for these people, and the endeavors they were involved in were sovereignty of their nations and really re-establishing this nation-to-nation relationship. And then the other big movement of decolonization, which I will frame as the process of rebuilding connections through generations, restoring pride of being Indigenous, affirming Indigenous identities, and reclaiming cultural practices. And so here is I saw a correlation between self-determination and cultural revitalization in the way that you can't determine the future of your nations and your people if you don't know your identity, if you don't know your roots. But before engaging in all that, I needed to connect with some of the women. And what I came to understand as very central and essential, especially in my first ethnographic fieldwork, was building a relationship and creating a bond with these youth. And this takes a few steps. I think you really have to be clear about your personal intentions. Why are you here? What do you want? Also showing up, going to events, participating, asking, and self-educating yourself. So you can ask, but you also need to read and learn on your own. And then embracing this responsibility as acknowledging your privilege and also sharing authority. Basic respect and mutual understanding is essential in all parts of relationships, but even more in research, I think. And then listening for the needs, the priorities, their interests, what's at play. Also being very clear about, or trying to be honest, I think, about your expectations. And being ready to receive a no, or have to wait, being flexible with the schedules. And so ultimately what you want to build throughout this process is trust. So they are for me, these are the 4 essential notions that I really try to embody in my work and these values. Commitment, being engaged in your research from start to finish. And so these 2 notions of accountability and continuity are really intertwined for me, because that creates research that becomes sustainable. in a way, and where you really engage and you're really held responsible for what you're doing. And I think there has been a lot of abuse, especially from previous anthropologists. So you really have to be transparent about these and stick to what you're saying, what you're doing. And then this principle of reciprocity. So I think you're all very aware of this giving back and all of these things. So I spent 6 months in 2016, in summer 2016, and then I went back in March this year to show them some of the results of the project we had done, to discuss the design, the different structure, evaluate. And this is a picture of the sugar shack where we went together. And again, it's like having activities and sharing time together, which isn't only research, when you can afford the time and the fundings and all of it. And this is a quote by one of the women. I sent a feedback survey, Google survey, to have a written evaluation of what they thought about the project. And one of them said, "The importance I give to revitalization is the reason why I'm studying at Kiuna." Kiuna is the only college for First Nations in Quebec. The project Circle of Voices helped me to define it better, to better understand what I do for my nation. So I think we are going to have a lot of parallels with, especially with Alaska, from what I could hear, but also with other parts across the Arctic, and this is southern Quebec. But yeah, First Nations youth encounter a lot of challenges and a lot of difficult situations. The impacts of colonialism are very present, they are very alive, whether it is on their lands, on their cultures, but also in their own families. There's this intergenerational trauma that is rolling. The suicide rate among First Nations is twice higher than in non-Indigenous communities, knowing that half of the population is below 35 years old, so it's a lot of young people. Then there's this educational gap again, big dropouts. A lot of people don't even get to college. Process of marginalization, exclusion, discrimination, racism. And then there is this interesting both phenomenon happening at the same time, in a way this like loss of cultural identity and confusion of landmarks, but in the other way also this whole globalization and the fact that these youth use social media a lot. I was actually quite surprised by that, and that they are really hungry, so to say, for new technologies. And the two last points are specifically about women. I think there are two kind of widespread narratives about Indigenous women, either romanticizing them, typically Pocahontas, I guess, and victimizing them, and then also violence and abuse. And there has been a commission which started in 2016, I think, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, which brought more and more attention about that. But it took a lot of time to actually start doing something. So this is a map of Quebec. You have the 11 nations. And this is a close-up, so Montreal is here. That's where I was based. And then I spent some time in Odanak, which is part of the Abenaki Nation, in Manawan, and in Kakuna. So the women I work with come from these three nations, which are part of the Algonquin family. All right. So before showing you some of the results and how I concretize this project, I just want to say a few words about cultural revitalization, what I think it means. It's about giving back strength, power, and recognition. It's about creating healthy bonds through generations while embracing modern challenges. It's about recovering one's culture, languages, and diverse traditional practices. Reclaiming fragmented heritage through time and space. And ultimately, I think it's about giving new life to what centuries of imperialism tried to annihilate. And so the approach was really trying to merge collaborative methodologies with these youth and also digital tools. So I created a website to present the ethnographic research, which is called Circle of Voices. It functions in a non-linear way, which I will explain shortly. And the source of inspiration for the design and the structure of the whole website was the medicine wheel. which is a pan-Amerindian symbol and tool to find balance and harmony at the personal and also at the collective levels. And it's this kind of map and representation of the interconnectedness of all beings, in a way. And I had a training about the medicine wheel back in Europe. I was really curious if this was actually still used nowadays in Canada and in different health or cultural organizations. And so I used it as a way to acknowledge Indigenous worldviews and really create a symbolic connection with the topic. So when I went there, I had two subtopics I really wanted to work on, spirituality and the artistic practices. And then being there, I realized that there were also two other essential issues. Indeed, the language and the land. And I think the revitalization of language is probably, like, the linguistic revitalization is quite often associated with that. And it's just a short anecdote. For example, among these three nations, the Wolastoq, there are no more speakers in the Quebec province. It's only New Brunswick. In the Abenaki Nation, there are only 4 fluent speakers. And the Atikamekw Nation, they learn it at school. They are taught in Atikamekw until age 10. So it varies a lot. So yeah, what I wanted to do with this whole representation through the web was exploring the potential of the web space to present academic knowledge together with Indigenous expertise and perspectives. And so here are a lot of different multimedia elements that I'm going to go through now. One of the activity we did were intergenerational dance workshops. One of the youth, Ivani, hosted the workshop, and it was fancy shawl power dance. Another classic ethnographic methods, biographical interviews, and some of the topics we touched upon in the interview were her path through education, or their path with education, the challenges that were specific for First Nations and in their personal lives, what were their passions, how did they envision the future, because I didn't want to do only negative things in a way. I wanted to have a positive interview. And then, yeah, what are the stereotypes and the prejudices that they are really disgusted by, that they would not like to hear anymore? And depending on the women, we also talked about how they built their identity and how their sense of pride, and how they were connected with revitalization. Another activity which was really popular with the youth was participatory photography workshop with the photo voice methodology, which is a participatory action research methodology. And this is a quote from Raphael. "The project brought me to learn about myself, to discover, to interact with myself, to do an introspection. I am more mature since I started learning about my culture, and your questions really bring us to reflect and to develop." And when she refers to the questions we had during the sharing circles, which is simply said, you sit in a circle and you share stories and experiences about themes and questions. I had designed the questions before, so again, there's like always some limits to collaboration and how do you design your methods. And there's a Cree Indigenous scholar who says, as a reflection of traditional worldviews, sharing circles can facilitate the empowerment of First Nations peoples. When First Nation utilize processes that are based upon their views within their communities, then the people determine their own destinies. And so while I had this training about the medicine wheel, we also did daily sharing circles as part of creating a school. And so it came out of my own curiosity to implement these circles. So I have also to state that it was from my initiative. Even though some of them had experiences with it and they had it at school, but yeah. And it's a quote from Katrine. "I really enjoyed it. Listening to the other perspectives is always interesting. It opens your eyes, you realize it builds up your understanding, you learn something new." So these were like really activities I did with the youth so far. And then I also did some things more on my own, so like personal ethnographic fieldwork. And interviewed 4 knowledge holders on the 4 topics. And here is Guy Siwi-Durand, who is an amazing man, very knowledgeable and fun, And I found that quote really, really beautiful. Before the conquest, before the colonization and the imposition of Western values, women were at the center of everything. This return to the revitalization of languages, dances, beading, crafting, and to talk about it as contemporary source of creation. I now see light signals in the grandmothers and in the young women. And a last activity or method I did was the sound and video recording of traditional practices. So on the website you can find just sound files and also sometimes video files. I wanted to play a little bit with these multimedia elements. For the land, I recorded ash pounding, which is a traditional Abenaki practice, actually threatened nowadays because there are only a few people doing it, and also there is a little insect that is eating a lot of the ash trees. I don't know the name in English. Grill. For language, storytelling in Atikamekw language with my friend Mary Christine and her grandmother. For the art, I chose basket weaving because it's still quite alive in the Abenaki community, and so here is sweetgrass, and they also use ash from the picture below. And for spirit powwow celebrations, I was there in the summer, so there were a lot of powwows happening. And this is just a beautiful invitation for non-Indigenous people to step in, to learn about the culture, and you have this celebration of food, dances, and singing and drumming. So if I want to sum it up, the purpose of the research was double. It was on one side to bring educational awareness about the situation of Indigenous women and youth, and also to support the defense of Indigenous rights. Some ways I would like to accomplish that, because the website is still not out yet, is to offer a digital space to uphold stories of pride, hope, and resilience in their cultures and identities. Also to counteract the negative representations displayed in the media, which are still very strong. And ultimately, maybe in a way deconstruct stereotypes and prejudice against Indigenous women and Indigenous peoples in general. And then the second aspect of supporting the defense of Indigenous rights, I also wrote a paper, because academia is also nice if you write an academic writing, which I really enjoyed actually. And in the last chapters, I used or implemented some of the articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is this very broad international legal frame. And I also used some of the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada to really root and make sense of cultural revitalization in these very official frames. So some of the next steps are the launch of the website, which I'm really excited about because I learned programming a year ago, and I've been programming the website since then. And my background is in social and cultural anthropology, so I have no idea about any tech things in IT. But it's been a wonderful learning experience. And we are Maliseet, the lady here, is actually at the moment running the Instagram account. And so we have this interesting shift where I can now rely on some of them and let them lead in a way. It's always like a process. But yeah, we want to put more content out on social media once the website will be ready. And I really would like to have my thesis peer-reviewed in Indigenous and non-Indigenous journals, I'm working on it. And so I think what was really interesting in the use of digital tools in that project was the possibility to digitalize and disseminate Indigenous knowledge and languages, because a lot of these are actually oral cultures. And so going through the written medium doesn't always fit in a way. And also this idea to reach beyond the academia and try to engage with the audience and have a visual language so that people get interested in these issues. Another thing, and again, it has to be balanced out with connectivity, for sure. But I think this whole digital era and world can really help to connect and involve marginalized communities with each other. So in a way that we can really like step out and let them take this space. And then, yeah, I guess I'm also very curious as it's for its potential for social and political change, and I have a very optimistic view on technology. Yes, and these are my contact informations.
Very impressive work.